Hey everyone. Tonight, we're not stepping into fiction. The world we're about to enter a place of silent signals, digital ghosts, and secrets that can topple nations is entirely real. This is the true story of a modern war fought not with armies, but with whispers and lines of code. The stakes are impossibly high, the players are phantoms, and every detail is drawn from events that actually happened. So, before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Find that comfortable position, dim the lights, and let the edges of your day begin to soften. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into the dark, a quick like and subscribe is always deeply appreciated, but only if you feel a genuine connection to what we do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always a quiet wonder to see how far these true stories travel. Now, close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and let's drift into the shadows of the real world together. Congratulations. You've just been given clearance to a world you were never meant to see. The good news? You're now inside one of the most sophisticated intelligence networks ever created. The bad news? It has a single, invisible flaw, and the walls are about to come crashing down. There are no castles or knights here, only secure servers, encrypted messages, and the quiet, crushing weight of a secret. Your world is one of handlers and assets, of dead drops in bustling foreign cities and information that travels at the speed of light. You feel safe, protected by a system so elegant, so flawlessly designed, that it feels like a fortress made of glass. But a ghost has already slipped through the firewall. A single line of code, a tiny architectural oversight, is about to become a thread. And a patient, unseen enemy has just found the end of it and is beginning to pull. The perfect system is a lie. The silence you hear isn't safety, it's the sound of a trap being set. Welcome to the invisible front line, a real place, where a single mistake doesn't just lose a battle, it erases an entire army of spies from existence. And this is just where the unraveling begins. It only gets quieter and more dangerous from here. The unquiet desert. The story begins not with a sound, but with a silence. In the heart of the great Iranian salt desert, under a sky of pale blue, a sprawling complex sits nestled between ancient mountains, a place of profound technological ambition. This is the Natanz Enrichment Facility, a city of science built to withstand the gaze of satellites and the tremors of the Earth itself. Deep beneath the ground, in vast, sterile halls, a constant and steady hum once filled the air, a sound of perfect mechanical harmony. It was the collective voice of thousands of centrifuges, each spinning faster than the speed of sound, each performing its part in an intricate and delicate atomic ballet. For years, this was the sound of progress, the unwavering rhythm of a nation's sovereign will. And then, one day in the summer of 2010, a strange and unsettling quiet began to fall. It was not a sudden power failure, nor the screech of failing machinery. It was a subtle decay, a digital ghost moving unseen through the facility's most guarded systems. A handful of centrifuges at first, then dozens, then hundreds, began to behave erratically. They would spin too fast, then too slow, their precise calibration undone by an invisible hand. Engineers in white lab coats watched their monitor screens in disbelief as the machines tore themselves apart, their harmonious hum replaced by the discordant shriek of stressed metal, followed by an unnerving silence. The data on their screens told them a lie, insisting that all was well, even as the physical evidence of failure mounted around them. An unseen tremor had passed through the heart of Natanz, a phantom earthquake that left no cracks in the concrete, only in the confidence of an entire nation. This silent, digital intrusion was a weapon of unprecedented sophistication, a complex worm of code that came to be known as Stuxnet. It was designed for a single purpose: to find its way into this isolated fortress of science and introduce chaos. The facility was an island, deliberately cut off from the global internet, an air-gapped sanctuary intended to be impenetrable to outside interference. Yet the ghost had found a way inside, carried past the guards and security checkpoints on a simple flash drive, a digital Trojan horse that opened the gates from within. The success of the operation was a marvel of covert engineering, but its true impact was not measured in the number of broken centrifuges. It was measured in the profound paranoia that it seeded within the very foundations of Iran's security apparatus. In the quiet, wood-paneled offices of Tehran, the men of the Ministry of Intelligence and Security faced a chilling realization. The enemy was not at the gate. The enemy was already inside the room. Such a precise and devastating blow could not have been struck without intimate knowledge of their operations, their technology, and their personnel. Someone, somewhere within their trusted ranks, had opened the door, and so began the great mole hunt. It was not a frantic or public affair, but a slow, methodical, and deeply fearful investigation that turned the instruments of state security inward upon themselves. Every scientist, every engineer, every administrator with access to the Natanz program was now viewed through a lens of suspicion. Their histories were re-examined, their communications monitored, their loyalties questioned. The search was akin to astronomers looking for a flaw in the predictable orbit of a distant star, a minute deviation that might betray the presence of an unseen gravitational force. The investigation unfolded in whispers, in sealed reports passed between a small circle of trusted officials. They were searching for a phantom, a double agent who wore the face of a patriot. The pressure to find this mole was immense. The Stuxnet incident was not just a technical failure, it was a national humiliation, a demonstration that even their most protected sanctum could be violated. The country's leaders, deeply unsettled by the breach, demanded answers. They wanted to know who had betrayed them, who had collaborated with the foreign powers, the United States and Israel, that they believed were responsible for this act of digital warfare. The paranoia that began in the quiet halls of Natanz soon radiated outward, touching every corner of Iran's defense and intelligence community. Trust, the bedrock of any clandestine organization, began to erode, replaced by a cold and pervasive suspicion. The investigators looked for anomalies in the vast sea of data that a modern state collects on its citizens. They searched for unusual financial transactions, unexplained travel, or patterns of communication that deviated from the norm. It was a painstaking process, like searching for a single grain of sand of a different color on an endless beach. Every lead was followed into the shadows, every potential suspect's life dissected with clinical precision. This was a new kind of war, one where the battlefield was not a stretch of land, but the loyalty of a human heart, and where the most valuable territory was information itself. The Iranian officials were retaliating against a blow they had only partially understood, hunting for a traitor who had helped an invisible enemy succeed. They were operating in a wilderness of mirrors, where every reflection could be a deception, and the true face of the enemy remained maddeningly out of sight. The mole hunt was driven by a single, fundamental question. How could Western intelligence, specifically the American Central Intelligence Agency, operate so effectively against a nation that was, by design, a black box to them? Iran was not a place one could easily penetrate. It was a closed society, deeply suspicious of outsiders, and possessing a sophisticated internal security service adept at monitoring and controlling its population. The discovery of the mole was paramount, but finding the mole was only the beginning. The true goal was to understand the methods the enemy used, to see the invisible structures of their intelligence networks, and to dismantle them piece by piece. The silence of the broken centrifuges in the desert had given rise to a storm of quiet activity in the capital, an exhaustive and desperate search for the source of their vulnerability. They began to pull at every loose thread, no matter how insignificant it seemed. They understood that the Stuxnet code could not have reached its destination by accident. It required a human agent, a willing or unwitting accomplice, to carry it into the heart of the facility. Finding that individual would be the key, the first step in unraveling the entire network that supported them. The atmosphere within Iran's intelligence circles grew heavy with the weight of this task. It was a silent, internal war waged in secure rooms and encrypted chat logs, a campaign against an enemy they could not see, but whose presence they felt everywhere. The unquiet desert had sent a shockwave of distrust back to the centers of power, forcing them to confront the terrifying possibility that their greatest weakness lay not in their technology, but in their people. The search for a ghost inside their walls would inevitably lead them to look outward, towards an adversary that had learned to move through their world unseen. The Ghost Network. In a world of shadows, spies cannot simply walk through the front door. To understand the events that unfolded in Iran, we must first travel to a land where every American agent is a ghost, an illegal presence in a nation that offers no sanctuary. Since the year 1979, there have been no American diplomatic facilities in Iran, no embassy flying the stars and stripes to offer protection, no official grounds to call home. In the complex chessboard of global espionage, this is a profound disadvantage. In other adversarial nations, like Russia or China, the Central Intelligence Agency can make use of a concept known as official cover. An agent can pose as a State Department employee, a cultural attaché, or a low-level diplomat, moving through the country with a degree of legitimacy and the protection that a diplomatic passport affords. But in Iran, no such cover exists. There is no plausible reason for an American official to be there, and so every operative must move under a different kind of cloak, one woven from pure invention. This reality makes the act of gathering intelligence within Iran's borders a task of immense difficulty and danger. Any agent who physically enters the country does so without a safety net. Their identity, a carefully constructed fiction; their itinerary, a script they must follow without flaw. A few might attempt to operate under what is known as business cover. They might enter the country as a geologist consulting on an oil survey, an art historian studying ancient Persian textiles, or a European businessman exploring new markets. Their American identity carefully buried beneath layers of a fabricated life. Such a role requires an extraordinary level of discipline and tradecraft. Every word, every gesture, every interaction is a performance. The pressure is constant, the isolation absolute. They are solitary actors on a hostile stage, where a single missed cue or a moment of carelessness could bring the entire production to a close. Because of this immense risk, such deep cover operations are rare, reserved for only the most critical of missions. The far more common method, the very backbone of the Ghost Network, was to build relationships and gather information on neutral ground. The work of recruiting and handling Iranian assets was largely conducted outside of Iran itself, in the bustling, transient hubs of neighboring regions. This strategy was born of necessity, a way to mitigate the extreme danger faced by the sources themselves. These assets, Iranian citizens providing information to the West, were the ones taking the greatest risk. A meeting with an American handler on their own soil could be a death sentence if discovered. And so, the intelligence ecosystem adapted, creating a web of clandestine meeting points in cities that served as global crossroads, places where people from all nations could mingle with a degree of anonymity. Imagine the city of Dubai, a forest of glass and steel rising from the desert sand, its air conditioned against the perpetual Sunday. It is a place built on commerce and transit, where tens of thousands of people pass through every day, their faces and purposes blending into a sea of international movement. Here, in the quiet, marble-floored lobby of a luxury hotel, a meeting might take place. An Iranian engineer, in the city for a supposed trade conference, sits in a plush armchair, sipping coffee. A short time later, another man, his handler, takes a seat at a nearby table. No overt greeting is exchanged, perhaps only a brief, almost imperceptible nod. For a few minutes, they exist in the same space. A newspaper might be left on a table, a briefcase subtly exchanged, a few quiet words spoken as one passes the other. The entire interaction is fleeting, buried in the mundane hum of the hotel, an act of espionage hidden in plain sight. Or consider Istanbul, a city that straddles two continents, its ancient history a constant presence amidst its modern, sprawling life. The air is filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts and the distant sound of ships moving along the Bosphorus. Here, a meeting might occur on a crowded public ferry, the participants surrounded by commuters and tourists, their conversation shielded by the noise of the engine and the chatter of the crowd. They could stand at the railing, looking out at the passing shoreline, their discussion a low murmur lost to the wind. In such a public space, they are paradoxically at their most secure. Their secret exchange, just one of thousands of conversations happening at that exact moment, their faces just two among many in a city of millions. The very density of the city provides a unique form of camouflage. Further east, in Malaysia, the city of Kuala Lumpur offers another such neutral territory. In the shadow of the gleaming Petronas Towers, surrounded by the humid tropical air and the lush greenery that pushes against the urban landscape, there are endless opportunities for a discreet encounter. A sprawling modern shopping mall, with its labyrinthine corridors and transient crowds, can become a temporary theater for intelligence work. An asset and a handler might arrange to be at the same bookstore at the same time, brushing past each other in a narrow aisle. A tiny data card passing from one hand to another in a movement too quick for the casual observer to ever notice. These cities, Dubai, Istanbul, Kuala Lumpur, and others like them, became the essential outposts of the Ghost Network. They were the neutral territory where the most dangerous work could be done with a manageable degree of risk. The logistics of arranging such meetings were themselves an act of delicate tradecraft. They could not be scheduled over a simple phone call or a standard email. Instead, they were summoned through prearranged signals, often sent through the vast and anonymous expanse of the internet. An asset in Tehran might be instructed to check a particular website at a particular time. There, they might see a seemingly innocent message, a coded phrase in a public forum, or a subtle change to an image. A message might simply state that an associate is slated to be in Dubai on July 4th. For the asset, this single phrase was an instruction, a summons. For the handler, it would set in motion a cascade of quiet, meticulous planning. Travel would be arranged, surveillance detection routes would be mapped out, and a secure location for the brief encounter would be chosen. This intricate, continent-spanning system of indirect contact was the lifeblood of American intelligence on Iran. It was cumbersome, it was slow, and it was complex, but it was a necessary adaptation to an environment of extreme hostility. It allowed the Central Intelligence Agency to maintain a presence, to gather information, and to cultivate sources without putting its own officers under the constant, crushing pressure of deep cover work within Iran's borders. More importantly, it offered a crucial layer of protection to the Iranian assets themselves, giving them a plausible reason to travel and a safer space in which to share what they knew. This ghost network, built on brief encounters in faraway cities and messages hidden in plain sight, was a testament to the patient, methodical nature of modern espionage. This delicate web of clandestine meetings and whispered secrets stretched across continents could only function through a precise division of labor, a silent cast of characters, each playing a vital and dangerous part. A lexicon of shadows, the world of intelligence is built on a precise and guarded language. Before we can understand the intricate web that was beginning to unravel, we must first learn the words used to describe the players in this silent game. These are not mere job titles. They are definitions of risk, purpose, and loyalty, each word delineating a life lived under a unique and often crushing weight of secrecy. This lexicon is the essential architecture of the Ghost Network, the framework upon which the entire clandestine structure is built. To know these terms is to understand the human components of a machine designed to operate in the spaces between nations, in the quiet moments where history is shaped unseen. We begin with the most familiar term, the agent. When we speak of an agent of the Central Intelligence Agency, we are speaking of a professional, a sworn employee of the United States government. They are the men and women who are recruited, trained, and paid to conduct the work of espionage. An agent might spend years learning a foreign language until it becomes as natural as their own, or studying the subtle customs of a culture to move within it without causing a ripple. Their life is one of discipline and compartmentalization. One might find them in a quiet, windowless room in Langley, Virginia, surrounded by satellite imagery and encrypted reports, piecing together a puzzle from 1,000 miles away. Another might be found in a nondescript apartment in a European capital, living under an assumed name, their mind entirely focused on the intricate details of an upcoming operation. The agent is the core of the organization, the trained professional at the center of the web. Among the many roles an agent might play, one of the most vital is that of the agent handler. The handler is the human link, the bridge between the formal institution of the agency and the unpredictable world of its sources. The relationship between a handler and the individuals they work with is one of the most complex in human affairs, a delicate balance of psychology, trust, manipulation, and shared vulnerability. A handler is a mentor, a guide, and a guardian. They are responsible for the well-being of the people who provide them with information, meticulously planning every detail of their encounters to minimize risk. They might spend days scouting a location for a meeting that will last only a few seconds, or choreographing a route through a crowded city that will allow their contact to arrive and depart without being followed. The handler carries the weight of another person's life in their hands, their asset's survival depending entirely on their foresight and caution. And this brings us to the most crucial player in this story, the asset. An asset is not an employee of the agency. They are a citizen of the target nation in this case, Iran, who has made a conscious decision to provide secret information to a foreign power. Their motivations are varied and complex. Some may be driven by ideology, a genuine belief that their government's actions are a danger to the world. Others may be motivated by disillusionment, by a sense of being wronged by the regime they serve. And for some, the reasons may be more personal, a need for money, a desire for revenge, or the simple thrill of a secret life. An asset might be a high-ranking scientist within the nuclear program, a man who goes to work each day in the very facilities the West seeks to understand. He performs his duties. He shares meals with his colleagues. He returns home to his family in the evenings, all while carrying a secret that, if discovered, would mean his immediate execution. The asset is the true ghost, a person living two lives at once, their every moment colored by the profound and constant risk of exposure. They are the invaluable source of ground truth, the human eyes and ears in a place where satellites cannot see. It is important to distinguish an asset from another key figure, the source. While an asset knowingly collaborates with a foreign intelligence service, a source is often an unwitting participant in the game. A source is simply a person with access to valuable information who is willing to share it, sometimes without fully understanding who they are talking to or the significance of what they are saying. Imagine a European technology consultant attending a trade conference in Tehran. In a casual conversation over dinner, an Iranian official might complain about technical problems at a particular government facility, revealing small but useful details. The consultant, who may have been cultivated by an agent for just such an opportunity, takes careful mental notes. The Iranian official believes he is merely having a polite conversation with a professional peer. He has no idea that he has just become a source of intelligence. The art of handling a source lies in this subtlety, in gently guiding a conversation to yield information without ever revealing the true nature of the inquiry. Behind all of these interactions lies the work of the targeting officer. This individual is the architect of the network, the strategist who identifies the people and organizations that hold the keys to the most critical secrets. The targeting officer works in the realm of potential, studying the human landscape of a target nation from afar. They might spend months building a psychological profile of a specific scientist, reading their published papers, noting their international travel, and looking for any sign of discontent or vulnerability that might make them receptive to an approach. They are the talent scouts of the intelligence world, piecing together fragments of public and classified information to identify the individuals who could, if persuaded, open a window into a closed society. It is the targeting officer's careful analysis that sets the entire chain of events in motion, leading to the first tentative contact that might one day cultivate a valuable asset. And finally, all the threads of information gathered by these disparate players, the reports from the handlers, the data from the assets, the casual remarks from the sources flow back to one place, to the quiet, analytical mind of the intelligence analyst. Far from the dangers of the field, the analyst sits at the nexus of it all. They are the interpreters, the weavers who take the raw, often contradictory, fragments of information and look for the larger pattern, the signal hidden in the noise. An analyst might compare a technical detail provided by an asset in Iran with a satellite photograph and a translated news report, and in the synthesis of those 3 points of data, a new truth might emerge. They are the ultimate audience for the secrets gathered at such great risk, transforming the whispers and stolen documents into a coherent understanding that can be presented to the highest levels of government. This entire ecosystem agent, handler, asset, source, targeting officer, and analyst is designed for a single purpose: to manage risk through compartmentalization. Each individual ideally knows only their own small part of the operation. An asset knows only their handler. A handler may manage several assets, but knows nothing of the assets of other handlers. This structure ensures that the capture or betrayal of one person does not automatically lead to the collapse of the entire network. It is a constellation of secrets, with each star deliberately kept distant from the others. But for this constellation to have meaning, for it to function as a coherent whole, its stars had to be connected by invisible lines of communication, a digital framework designed to operate in the deepest of shadows. The digital masquerade. The most important secrets were not hidden in a heavily guarded vault, but behind the simple, unassuming facade of the ordinary. The Ghost Network, with its cast of characters scattered across the globe, was entirely dependent on a single, vital function: the ability to communicate. Yet, in a country like Iran, with a sophisticated and pervasive state security apparatus, every conventional method of communication was a trap. A text message would travel through state-owned telecommunication companies, its contents easily read. An email, even one sent from a generic account, could be traced and intercepted. Modern encrypted messaging applications, while secure in transit, presented a fatal risk. The mere presence of such an app on an asset's phone could be a piece of damning evidence. A digital confession waiting to be discovered during a random search. And a direct connection to a server based in Langley, Virginia, would be a flare in the night, an obvious and immediate signal of espionage. The solution had to be something far more subtle, a method of communication that was, in essence, invisible. The system they developed was a masterpiece of digital misdirection, a true masquerade. It was not a single, hardened platform, but a distributed network of unassuming websites. To the casual visitor, these sites were exactly what they claimed to be: mundane corners of the internet dedicated to harmless hobbies and everyday interests. One might be a blog about yoga and wellness, its pages filled with articles on breathing techniques and mindful meditation, the design a calming palette of soft greens and earthy browns. Another could be a simple weather forecasting site, offering temperature and precipitation data for cities around the world. A third might be an online forum for fans of classic literature, where users could discuss the nuances of 19th century novels. These websites were fully functional, populated with real content, and designed to attract a small but plausible amount of ordinary internet traffic. They were needles in the infinite haystack of the World Wide Web, designed not to stand out, but to blend in perfectly. The true purpose of these sites was hidden deep within their code, accessible only to those who knew the secret. For an asset in Tehran, connecting with their handler was a ritual of quiet, careful steps. Late at night, in the privacy of their home, with the city lights casting a soft glow through the window, they would navigate to one of these seemingly ordinary websites. To any family member glancing at the screen, their activity would appear completely innocent. They were simply reading about travel destinations, or checking the exchange rate, or looking up a recipe. But the asset knew that this public facade was a stage. Their communication was a hidden performance, one that relied on a secret trigger, a digital key known only to them and their handler. This trigger could be almost anything. On the travel forum, it might be the act of clicking on a specific pixel in the corner of a photograph of an ancient ruin. On the yoga blog, it might be logging in at a very specific time, down to the second, which would open a different version of the site entirely. On the weather website, the key might be to type the name of a non-existent city into the search bar. To a normal user, this action would return an error message. But for the asset, this specific string of letters would not produce an error. Instead, it would be the command that opened a hidden door, a back channel that led to a simple, secure, and encrypted communication platform. Here, in this concealed space, they could receive instructions, upload data, or send a simple message to confirm that they were safe, a sign of life from deep within a closed society. The system's brilliance lay in its camouflage. The small bursts of encrypted data sent by the asset were hidden within the website's normal traffic, like a single whispered word in the roar of a crowded stadium. To any external observer monitoring internet activity, the asset was just another user interacting with a harmless website. There were no suspicious connections being made to known intelligence servers, no unusual software being run. It was a near-perfect operational security solution, akin to two spies communicating not by passing secret notes, but by arranging the books in a public library in a specific pre-agreed order. To the librarian and every other visitor, nothing is out of place. But to the two people who know the code, the shelf of books is a clear and detailed message. The vast, chaotic, and public nature of the internet was not an obstacle. It was the very thing that provided the perfect cover. This digital masquerade was considered so secure, so reliable, that it became a trusted tool not just for the Central Intelligence Agency, but for its closest allies as well. The United Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Service, known as MI6, is understood to have used a version of this platform to communicate with its own sources. Components of the United States military's intelligence arm, the Defense Clandestine Service, also relied upon it. The system was seen as a state-of-the-art solution to the timeless problem of covert communication. It was elegant, it was discreet, and above all, it was believed to be safe. Handlers could confidently train their assets to use these websites, assuring them that this method was their best protection against discovery, their safest way to transmit the vital information they risked their lives to obtain. For years, the system worked as intended. Messages were passed, meetings were arranged, and a steady stream of intelligence flowed out of Iran, giving the West a crucial window into the country's secret ambitions. The assets, emboldened by the seeming security of the platform, continued their dangerous work. The handlers, trusting the technology provided to them, managed their networks and built their relationships through these hidden digital doors. The entire edifice of the Ghost Network, this complex human machinery of espionage, was built upon the foundation of this single technological solution. It was the invisible thread that connected all the disparate players, allowing a scientist in Isfahan to communicate with a handler in Vienna as if they were in the same room. It was a fortress of secrets built from the most common of materials, a digital masquerade that seemed, to all who used it, to be utterly flawless. But even in the most carefully constructed facade, a single, observant eye might find a crack, a tiny imperfection that reveals the hollow space behind the wall. The Cassandra Contract. In the vast and complex machinery of intelligence, with its countless moving parts and interlocking systems, a single human voice noticed a flaw. He was not a high-ranking official in a corner office, nor a celebrated field agent. He was a contractor named John Reedy, a specialist whose job it was to work within the gears of this great machine. And in the year 2009, he saw a hairline crack in the digital fortress that everyone else believed to be impenetrable, a warning that would go unheard. John Reedy was what is known in the intelligence world as a targeter, working for a private company that provided services to the Central Intelligence Agency. His role was a crucial one. He was one of the architects of the Ghost Network, a person responsible for identifying potential sources in hostile territories and, most importantly, for setting up the secure lines of communication they would use. He was intimately familiar with the digital masquerade, not merely as a user, but as an implementer. He had seen the blueprints of the system, he understood its architecture, and it was his professional duty to ensure its integrity. He was, in essence, a gatekeeper, responsible for handing the keys of this secret kingdom to the assets who risked their lives on its security. Through his work, Reedy began to perceive a subtle but profound vulnerability. It was not a simple bug in the code or a loophole that could be easily patched. It was a fundamental flaw in the very design of the network of websites, a quiet, architectural inconsistency that connected them all. The system's strength was supposed to be its decentralization, the idea that each covert website was an island, separate and distinct from all the others. The capture of one was not supposed to compromise the rest. But Reedy saw an invisible thread, a common signature in the code or the server infrastructure that linked these digital islands together, turning them into a single, contiguous chain. It was an astonishingly dangerous oversight, akin to an engineer designing a series of submarine compartments, each with a watertight door, but failing to notice that they were all connected by a single, shared ventilation duct. A flood in one compartment would inevitably lead to a flood in them all. Understanding the catastrophic potential of this flaw, Reedy did what his position required of him. He documented his findings. This was not a frantic, emotional plea, but a sober and methodical report, a professional assessment of a grave and systemic risk. In his official disclosure, he outlined the technical details of the vulnerability, explaining how an adversary, if they were to discover just one of the websites, could theoretically use this shared signature to find all the others. He characterized the situation as a massive intelligence failure in the making. He warned that the continued use of this flawed system could create a nightmare scenario, one that would not only compromise operations, but would directly lead to the loss of human lives. He was the watchman on the tower, sounding an alarm about a fire that only he could see. His report, filled with technical specifics and dire predictions, made its way through the proper channels, up the chain of command within the agency. And there, in the quiet, deliberative halls of the bureaucracy, it met a wall of institutional inertia. For a large, complex organization, the implications of Reedy's findings were deeply problematic. This communication system was not some minor, experimental tool. It was a cornerstone of global operations, a platform that had been developed at great expense and was being used by thousands of operatives and assets around the world, including the agency's closest international partners. To acknowledge that the entire system was fundamentally flawed would be to admit a colossal error. It would necessitate a complete and costly overhaul, a monumental task that would disrupt operations on a global scale. It is often the nature of large institutions that it is easier to accept a manageable risk than it is to undertake the disruptive and expensive process of a fundamental change. Furthermore, the message was complicated by the messenger. In the world of intelligence, whistleblowers are rarely seen as perfect vessels of truth. According to reports, John Reedy had a competing business on the side, and there were other issues that allowed his superiors to cast doubt not on the substance of his claims, but on his motivations for making them. It is a classic bureaucratic defense mechanism. When the message is uncomfortable, scrutinize the messenger. His concerns could be framed not as a legitimate security warning, but as the complaint of a disgruntled contractor, his motives muddied by personal interests. And so, the focus shifted away from the flaw in the system and onto the perceived flaws of the man who had discovered it. In a world saturated with information and countless competing priorities, a single warning, even one as grave as this, can simply fail to gain traction. Reedy's report was one of thousands of memos circulating within the agency at any given time, his voice one among many. Without a chorus of others to echo his concerns, his disclosure lacked the institutional weight required to force the kind of seismic, immediate action that was needed. The digital masquerade was working. Intelligence was flowing, assets were checking in, and from the outside, the system appeared to be a resounding success. Reedy's warning of a theoretical future catastrophe was weighed against the practical successes of the present, and the present won out. The risk he described seemed abstract, a distant possibility, while the benefits of the system were tangible and immediate. The decision was made not through a single dramatic rejection, but through a slow, quiet process of inaction. His report was acknowledged, it was considered, and then it was filed away. No major overhaul was ordered. No urgent, system-wide alert was issued to the handlers and assets who continued to use the platform every day, trusting their lives to its security. The machine, finding the warning of a broken gear to be inconvenient, simply continued to turn. John Reedy, the man who had tried to avert the disaster, was himself seen as a problem to be managed. His contract was terminated, his security clearance revoked, his professional life undone. He had pointed a finger at a flaw in the system, and the system, in turn, had removed him. His warning became a silent record, a memo filed away in the deep archives of the agency. The flaw persisted, a quiet vulnerability waiting in the code, and out in the world, the game of espionage continued, blind to the disaster that was now not just possible, but inevitable. The double agent's gift. The great unraveling began not with a sophisticated hack or a feat of cryptographic genius, but with a single, quiet act of betrayal. While the unheeded warning of John Reedy gathered dust in a forgotten file in Virginia, the Iranian mole hunt continued its slow and patient work. For months, investigators from the Ministry of Intelligence had been moving through the corridors of their own government, sifting through personnel files, analyzing communication logs, and conducting quiet interviews. They were chasing a phantom, the ghost of Stuxnet, searching for the human hand that had guided the digital weapon to its target. The work was painstaking and often frustrating, a search for a single discordant note in a symphony of state secrets. But all their efforts had yet to yield the breakthrough they so desperately needed. The traitor remained a shadow, and the methods of their adversary remained a mystery. The answer, when it finally came, arrived from a direction they had not anticipated. It came from a person the Central Intelligence Agency believed to be one of their own, a valuable asset cultivated over time, a window into the inner workings of the Iranian regime. This individual was playing a long and dangerous game, a double agent of profound skill and loyalty to their home nation. To their American handlers, they were a source of credible, if carefully managed, intelligence, a confirmation of the success of their recruitment efforts. In reality, this person was an instrument of Iranian counterintelligence, a listening post placed deep within the enemy's network. Their true mission was not to transmit secrets, but to receive them, to learn the tradecraft and the technology of the other side, and to wait patiently for the opportune moment to strike. That moment finally arrived. In a discreet meeting, the details of which remain buried in classified histories, the double agent met with their true handlers from the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence. The setting would have been intentionally mundane, a place that would draw no attention, a quiet corner of a bustling bazaar, a private room in a family restaurant, or the back seat of a car moving through Tehran's anonymous traffic. Here, the agent delivered their priceless gift. It was not a heavy briefcase filled with stolen documents, nor a lengthy verbal debriefing. It was something small, modern, and deceptively simple: the web address of one of the covert websites used for the digital masquerade. It was a single line of text, a key to a hidden kingdom, passed from one hand to another, a simple transaction that would pivot the course of this silent, global conflict. For the Iranian intelligence officers, this was the breakthrough they had been working towards since the day the centrifuges at Natanz fell silent. The information was taken to a secure facility, a high-tech nerve center shielded from electronic eavesdropping. There, a small team of specialists would have gathered around a single, isolated computer terminal. The air in the room would have been still, the atmosphere one of cold, professional focus. One of the technicians would have typed the address into a secure web browser, and on the screen, a website would have appeared, its design perfectly ordinary, its content utterly banal. Perhaps it was the travel forum, with its cheerful posts about tourist destinations, or the wellness blog, with its calming articles on meditation. To an outsider, it would have meant nothing. But to the men in that room, it was a revelation. They were looking, for the very first time, at the secret architecture of their enemy. This single web address changed the entire nature of their investigation. Before this moment, the mole hunt had been an abstract exercise, a search for a human being based on behavioral patterns and circumstantial evidence. Now, it became concrete. They were no longer just hunting for a person, they were in possession of a tangible piece of the enemy's infrastructure. They had captured a piece of the machine. The focus of their efforts could now shift from the slow work of human intelligence to the faster, more precise world of technical analysis. They could study this website as a zoologist studies a captured specimen, dissecting its code, monitoring its traffic, and learning its hidden language. The mole who had helped damage Natanz was still a ghost, but now they knew the shape of the house the ghost lived in. The discovery was like being lost in a dark and unfamiliar maze, and then suddenly being handed a single page of the blueprint. It did not reveal the entire layout, but it provided a vital starting point. The Iranian technicians could begin to probe the website's defenses, to understand its security protocols, and to look for the subtle signatures that might identify its creators. They could observe the patterns of its legitimate public traffic and try to distinguish it from the quiet, hidden whispers of its covert users. For years, they had been on the outside looking in, trying to guess at the methods the Central Intelligence Agency was using to operate within their borders. Now, they were on the inside of one small room, and from there, they could begin to map the rest of the building. The double agent had provided more than just a target. They had provided a lesson. The information was a confirmation that the Americans were not using conventional encrypted applications or direct connections, but were instead hiding their communications in plain sight, using the public internet as a form of camouflage. This understanding was, in itself, a profoundly valuable piece of counterintelligence. It reoriented their entire defensive strategy, teaching them what to look for. They were no longer searching for suspicious transmissions rocketing towards Virginia, but for the faint, anomalous signals hidden within the mundane chatter of everyday websites. The gift was not just a key, it was a Rosetta Stone, one that would help them translate the secret language of their adversary. In their secure rooms, the Iranian intelligence officers would have felt a quiet sense of triumph, not of a battle won, but of a new and promising front being opened. The game had changed. The frustration of the long mole hunt was replaced by the intellectual excitement of this new technical challenge. The single website was their thread, and their entire focus now turned to pulling on it to see what it was connected to and how much of their enemy's hidden tapestry it might unravel. In their hands, they now held a single digital key, a gift from an agent who had played the long game to perfection. They did not yet know that it was a master key, but as they began to examine its intricate design, they started to suspect that it might unlock more than just one door. The unraveling thread. The breach that would ultimately compromise a global intelligence network did not widen because of a complex hack or a brute force assault. It did not require the digital equivalent of a battering ram or a siege engine. The entire facade of the digital masquerade was brought down by the simple, patient pulling of a single, loose thread, an act of discovery that required not overwhelming force, but quiet observation and elegant deduction. In their secure technical facility in Tehran, the Iranian intelligence team began their study of the single covert website provided by the double agent. They treated the site like an artifact from an unknown civilization, handling it with immense care on an isolated network, ensuring their own explorations left no trace. Their initial goal was not to break into the site's hidden areas, but simply to understand its construction. They examined every line of its code, every script that ran in the background, every digital certificate that authenticated its identity. They were searching for its secrets, reading its digital DNA to understand how it was designed, and more importantly, who had designed it. It was a slow and methodical process, a form of digital archaeology, dusting away the layers of benign code to find the unique signature of its true architects. During this patient examination, a technician noticed something peculiar. It was a small and seemingly insignificant detail, a digital fingerprint hidden in plain sight. It might have been a unique string of characters in the website's metadata, or a custom-written piece of JavaScript used to perform a common function, or perhaps an unusual parameter in the way the site communicated with its server. Whatever its exact form, it was a characteristic that was both unique and non-essential to the website's public function. It was a quirk of its design, a subtle flourish left by the developers, an artisan's mark on a piece of secret craftsmanship. To any normal user, this detail was invisible and irrelevant. But to a trained counterintelligence technician, it was a potential lead, a scent to be followed. It was the unique, custom-made doorknob on the door of a single secret room. The critical question then became, had the builders used this same unique doorknob on any of their other secret rooms? The answer to this question would not be found by trying to hack the website itself. It would be found out in the open, in the vast, indexed archives of the public internet. The technician took this unique digital signature, this small string of code, and turned it into a search query. Using the powerful tools of open source intelligence, the kind of creative and sophisticated searching that goes far beyond a casual web search, they began to hunt. They were not looking for another website by name, but for any other site, anywhere in the world, that shared this exact, peculiar fingerprint. The first search may have returned thousands of irrelevant results, a sea of digital noise. But with refined queries, patiently sifting through the data, a single, remarkable result appeared. It was another website with a different name, a different theme, and hosted in a different country. On the surface, it had no connection to the first. It could have been the yoga blog, while the first was the travel forum. But when the technicians examined its underlying code, they found it, the exact same unique signature, the same digital fingerprint, the same custom-made doorknob. It was a stunning confirmation. The secret rooms were not, in fact, separate. They were connected. This single discovery transformed the investigation. The team now had 2 data points, which allowed them to refine their search parameters even further, making their queries more specific and more powerful. They ran the search again. Another match appeared, and then another. The process became a quiet, cascading revelation. On a large screen in that secure room, a list of websites began to grow. The weather site, the literature forum. One by one, the components of the digital masquerade were being identified and mapped. Each successful search confirmed that the flaw was not an isolated mistake, but a systemic feature of the entire communications network. The very thing John Reedy had warned of years before was now unfolding in real time. The shared architectural feature, the single point of failure he had identified in a theoretical report, was now being used as a practical tool to dismantle the entire network he had tried to protect. The atmosphere in the room would not have been one of loud celebration, but of a quiet, chilling sense of awe at the scale of their breakthrough. The number of discovered websites climbed from a handful to a dozen to several dozen. They were no longer looking at a collection of individual sites. They were looking at a global infrastructure. The work of years, spanning multiple intelligence agencies and costing untold millions of dollars, was being laid bare by a series of elegant, simple searches. The digital islands, which were believed to be isolated sanctuaries, were revealed to be a single, interconnected archipelago, and the Iranians had just discovered the underwater bridge that linked them all. The flaw was a catastrophic failure of the most basic principle of operational security: compartmentalization. The builders of the system, in a moment of convenience or oversight, had reused a piece of their own unique design across the entire platform. In doing so, they had given their adversaries a single thread, and by pulling on it, the Iranians were now unraveling the whole sweater. The full scope of the compromise was staggering. It was not just the communication network for Iran that was now exposed, but potentially the entire global platform upon which the Central Intelligence Agency and its allies relied. Every asset, every handler, every operative who had ever used one of these sites was now at risk. Their belief in the security of the system, the very foundation of their willingness to conduct their dangerous work, was based on an illusion. The search was over. On their screens lay a complete map of the Ghost Network, every secret website exposed. The unraveling thread had led them to the heart of the labyrinth, and now, with the blueprint in hand, they could begin the quiet, patient work of becoming its masters. They had moved from a position of blindness to one of near omniscience. They now knew the secret meeting places of their enemy. The question was no longer how to find the network. The question was how best to use it against its creators. The listening posts, the secret websites, once a sanctuary for covert communication, were transformed. Silently, and without the knowledge of their creators or their users, they ceased to be tools of espionage for the West. Instead, they became the most effective listening posts imaginable for the intelligence services of Iran, a network of digital traps that were now fully under the control of the gamekeepers. Upon discovering the full map of the digital masquerade, the Iranian intelligence officials were faced with a critical strategic choice. Their most immediate impulse might have been to dismantle the network, to shut down the websites and publicly expose the flaw as a demonstration of their own counterintelligence prowess. Such a move would have been a significant propaganda victory, a way to humiliate their adversary on the world stage. But the leaders of the Ministry of Intelligence chose a path of far greater subtlety and strategic patience. They understood that to shut the network down would be to alert the Central Intelligence Agency that its system was compromised. The Americans, realizing their methods were exposed, would immediately abandon the platform, sever contact with their assets, and retreat into the shadows to build a new, more secure system. The window of opportunity would slam shut. And so, a different decision was made. The websites would be allowed to continue operating, untouched and apparently secure. The Iranians would not interfere, they would not disrupt. They would not even leave a single digital fingerprint to suggest their presence. They would simply watch, and they would listen. By leaving their enemy's communication system intact, they could turn it from a tool into a weapon, transforming the Ghost Network's greatest asset into its most catastrophic liability. The digital masquerade, designed to protect secrets, would now be the very thing that revealed them all. Every message, every piece of data, Every whispered plan intended for Langley, Virginia, would now be delivered first to a secure server in Tehran. In a quiet, climate-controlled room, shielded from any form of electronic surveillance, a team of Iranian analysts began their silent vigil. On their monitors, the secret life of the Ghost Network began to scroll by in real time. They were reading the private thoughts of their enemy, listening to conversations that were never meant for their ears. An asset, a scientist at a research facility, might upload a technical document, believing he was sending it securely to his American handler. That document would appear, seconds later, on the screen of an Iranian analyst who would quietly save it and add it to a growing file. A handler from a safe house in Europe might send a message of encouragement to a nervous source inside the Iranian government, offering praise and instructions for their next task. That message, full of the subtle psychological nuances of espionage tradecraft, would be read and analyzed by a team of counterintelligence experts. The Iranians were no longer guessing at the identities of the traitors within their midst. The network itself was telling them. They could see the code names used by the assets, and by cross-referencing the content of their messages with their own internal security files, they could begin to put real names and faces to those code names. They were mapping not just the digital network, but the human one. They learned the entire structure of the American operations, who reported to whom, which assets were considered most valuable, and what information was being prioritized. They learned the rhythms of communication, the specific times that assets were scheduled to check in, and the coded language they used to signal duress or safety. They were being given a complete and unprecedented look into the inner workings of their adversary's intelligence-gathering machine. The dramatic irony of the situation was profound. Every day, CIA handlers and their Iranian assets would engage in their dangerous dance, their confidence buoyed by the belief that their communications were invisible and untraceable. An asset, taking an immense personal risk, would feel a sense of relief as they successfully uploaded a piece of information, believing their secret was safe. A handler would feel a sense of accomplishment, believing they had just scored another victory in the silent war for information. And all the while, their every move was being observed, their every word recorded, by the very organization they were working against. The act of espionage, intended to gather secrets, had become an act of unwitting confession, with each transmission further tightening the invisible net around the sender. It was the digital equivalent of an army capturing their enemy's unbroken codebook and a complete list of their radio frequencies. In such a scenario, the wisest course of action is not to jam the radio signals, but to listen to them. You allow your opponent to continue broadcasting, believing their communications are secure, and in doing so, they will reveal their own troop movements, their strategies, and their entire order of battle. The Iranians had achieved this state of total information dominance. They were not just intercepting messages, they were living inside their enemy's central nervous system, feeling every pulse and anticipating every move. For months, this silent harvest of information continued. The Iranians played the long game, resisting the temptation to act, instead focusing on gathering as much intelligence as they possibly could. They patiently built their files, creating detailed profiles of every asset, every handler, and every operative connected to the network. They learned the locations of planned meetings in Dubai and Istanbul. They identified the dead drops where information was to be left, and they pieced together the entire tapestry of American operations in their country and the surrounding region. It was one of the most significant counterintelligence coups of the modern era, and it was all happening in complete and total silence. The web of secrets was now fully illuminated, every connection traced, every identity known. The patient work of listening was complete, and in the quiet, secure rooms of Tehran, a new phase was being planned, one that would move from the passive observation of shadows to the active hunting of them. The long game. With the entire map of the Ghost Network now laid bare before them, the intelligence officials in Tehran transitioned from a phase of passive listening to one of active, meticulous planning. The time for gathering information was over. The time for using that information to dismantle their adversaries' operations had arrived. This new phase would be a demonstration of strategic patience, a complex and disciplined counterintelligence campaign known as the long game. The objective was not merely to capture the assets, but to do so in a way that would yield the greatest possible advantage, to turn each captured individual into a new source of insight, and to identify the professional American handlers who guided them from the shadows. The plan began with the selection of a target. From the dozens of assets they had identified through the compromised communication channels, the Iranians would choose one. They knew this person's role, their access, and, most importantly, they knew their schedule. They had read the messages arranging the next clandestine meeting in a neutral third country. With this knowledge, they could set a trap not on their own soil, but on the international stage, in the very places the Central Intelligence Agency had chosen for their safety. This was the opening move in a chess match where one player could see every future move of the other. Imagine an Iranian asset, a mid-level official in the country's industrial sector, a man with access to sensitive technical data. He sits in his apartment in Tehran one evening and receives the coded summons through the familiar, trusted channel of the digital masquerade. The message is simple. He is to travel to Dubai for a supposed engineering conference in 2 weeks' time. His American handler will meet him there. The asset feels the familiar surge of adrenaline and purpose. He makes his travel arrangements. He fabricates a plausible reason for his trip to his superiors and his family, and he prepares the information he has been gathering. He believes his operational security is perfect, his communication channels secure. The journey to Dubai, in his mind, is a journey towards a temporary sanctuary, a place where he can breathe easier and speak more freely. But long before his plane ever leaves the runway in Tehran, the Iranian counterintelligence team is already in motion. A ghost team of their own, comprised of several highly trained surveillance operatives, travels to Dubai. They arrive on separate flights, check into different hotels under assumed identities, and blend into the city's international fabric. They are tourists, they are businessmen, they are nobody at all. Their sole focus is the upcoming meeting. They have the asset's photograph, they know his flight schedule, and they know the location of the planned encounter, perhaps a quiet cafe in a sprawling modern shopping mall. They scout the location for days, mapping out every entrance and exit, every camera angle, every possible observation point. Their preparation is as meticulous as that of the American handler they are planning to watch. When the asset's flight lands at Dubai International Airport, he is already under surveillance. As he collects his luggage and takes a taxi to his hotel, a member of the Iranian team is never more than a few hundred feet away, a silent, unseen shadow. The asset checks into his room, unpacks, and perhaps takes a moment to look out at the city's futuristic skyline, feeling a sense of freedom. He is entirely unaware that his every move is being documented. The next day, he proceeds to the designated meeting place. He finds the cafe, orders a drink, and waits. The Iranian surveillance team is already in position. One operative might be sitting several tables away, appearing to read a newspaper. Another might be in a shop across the wide corridor, using a long-range camera to capture high-resolution images. Then, the American handler arrives. He is a professional, and his own tradecraft is excellent. He approaches the cafe cautiously, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, he proceeds with the meeting. For the Iranian surveillance team, this is the pivotal moment. The asset is a target, but the handler is the true prize. A photograph of this man, a professional officer of the Central Intelligence Agency, is an intelligence victory of immense value. His face can be added to watch lists, run through facial recognition databases, and shared with allied intelligence services. Identifying him opens up new avenues of investigation, allowing the Iranians to trace his past movements and potentially identify other networks he may be running. The meeting itself is brief. A quiet conversation, a subtle exchange. The operatives document it all. As the meeting concludes and the handler and asset part ways, the Iranian team splits. A smaller unit is tasked with following the American handler, tracking him back to his hotel, learning what they can about his operational patterns. But the main team's focus remains on their primary target, the asset. They shadow him for the remainder of his time in Dubai. They watch as he attends the fictional conference, as he shops, as he eats in restaurants. He is a man moving through the final hours of his secret life, entirely oblivious to the invisible cage that has been built around him. This patient, methodical approach is a hallmark of sophisticated counterintelligence, a strategy with deep historical roots. During the height of the Cold War, the intelligence service of Cuba achieved a legendary success against the Central Intelligence Agency. The agency believed it was successfully recruiting a network of Cuban officials to spy for the United States. In reality, Cuba's security service was aware of nearly every recruitment from the very beginning. Instead of immediately arresting the newly recruited assets, they would approach them and turn them, convincing them to work as double agents. As a result, for years, the CIA's entire network of spies in Cuba was, in fact, secretly working for the Cuban government, feeding the Americans a steady stream of carefully crafted disinformation. It was a masterful long game, and the Iranians were now employing a similar playbook. The final act of this particular play was the asset's return journey. He boards his flight back to Tehran, perhaps feeling a sense of relief, the most dangerous part of his mission now complete. He lands at Imam Khomeini International Airport and proceeds to passport control. He is not stopped. His luggage is not subjected to an unusual search. He is waved through, and he steps out into the familiar air of his home country. To arrest him in Dubai would have been easy, but it would have alerted the Americans that their operations in that city were being monitored. To arrest him at the airport upon his return would have been possible but less clean, potentially revealing the extent of their surveillance. The most effective strategy was to let him return to the heart of his country, to his home, to his job, and to his family. He had returned to the heart of his country, believing he was a ghost, a secret agent of change. But in the long game of counterintelligence, he was no longer the hunter, but the hunted, and the patient watchers in the shadows were simply waiting for the perfect moment to close their fist. The fading signals, a profound and unsettling silence began to fall over the ghost network. In the distant, secure offices where American handlers monitored their digital channels, the steady, rhythmic pulse of incoming intelligence began to slow, falter, and then, one by one, stop. The messages that had once flowed reliably from deep within Iran, the signs of life, the whispered secrets, the plans for future meetings, were now met with an unnerving digital void. The long game of patient observation had concluded. In Tehran, with a complete and undeniable body of evidence in hand, the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence made the decision to move from a posture of passive surveillance to one of active dismantlement. The harvest, as it might have been called in their quiet internal memoranda, was about to begin. There were no dramatic, high-profile raids, no public announcements of uncovered spy rings. The counter-offensive unfolded with the same quiet, methodical precision that had characterized the surveillance phase. It happened in the ordinary moments of daily life. A mid-level bureaucrat might be calmly asked to step out of a meeting by two men in unassuming suits and would simply never return to his desk. A scientist, driving home from his laboratory, might be flagged down at a routine checkpoint, politely asked to accompany the officers, and then disappear from the world his family knew. A quiet knock on a door late in the night, a brief, hushed conversation, and another individual would be gone, swallowed by the state's security apparatus. Far away, the handlers of these assets knew nothing of these silent arrests. Their world was one of digital signals and scheduled check-ins, a reality twice removed from the physical dangers their sources faced. A handler in a European safe station might log into the covert communication platform at a prearranged time, expecting a message from a trusted asset he had been cultivating for years. He would wait. The scheduled time would come and go. No message would appear. At first, this would be a matter of professional concern, but not yet alarm. In the world of espionage, silence can be a tactic. An asset might be under temporary surveillance and wisely choose to stay offline. There could be a technical issue, a simple internet outage. The handler would make a note, follow protocol, and wait for the next scheduled contact in a few days' time. But then another handler, working a completely separate and compartmentalized network, would experience the same phenomenon. An asset of his, a source with no connection to the first, would also miss a check-in, and then a third and a fourth. In the central analysis hubs, back in Langley, Virginia, the true scale of the disaster would begin to emerge not as a sudden explosion, but as a slow, creeping pattern of decay. Analysts who monitored the overall health of the network would see the anomalies begin to stack up. The fading signals were not random. They were clustered, they were spreading, and they were all confined to the Iranian network. A quiet digital plague was sweeping through their most critical intelligence-gathering operation, and the agency was utterly powerless to stop it. The dawning realization in those quiet rooms would have been a cold and sickening one. This was not a series of isolated incidents. This was a coordinated sweep. The network was not just in trouble. It was being systematically annihilated. For the captured assets in Iran, their journey had come to a sudden and terrible end. They were taken to secure detention facilities, places like Tehran's notorious Evin prison, where they would be held incommunicado, their fate unknown to the outside world and even to their own families. There, in stark, windowless rooms, they would be interrogated, the full weight of the state's power brought to bear upon them. The secrets they had guarded for so long would be methodically extracted. Some, having revealed what they knew, were sentenced in secret tribunals to long, dark years of imprisonment, their names and histories erased from public record, their lives reduced to a number in a forgotten file. For many others, the outcome was more final. They were executed, their deaths as secret as the lives they had led. There would be no announcement, no public trial. Their story and their life would come to a silent and solitary close. The human cost of the compromise was devastating. These were not soldiers captured on a battlefield, but individuals, scientists, officials, engineers who had made a dangerous and personal choice, often driven by a belief that they were acting for a greater good. They were people with families, with histories, with lives that were now being extinguished in the shadows, their sacrifices unknown and unacknowledged by the world outside. For the Central Intelligence Agency, the loss was catastrophic. A network that had taken years, even decades, to build, a delicate web of human relationships nurtured through patience and trust, was wiped out in a matter of weeks. The agency's eyes and ears inside Iran had been removed. They were now blind in one of the most strategically important and opaque nations on Earth. The lights on their intelligence map, which had once provided a clear picture of the country's inner workings, were going out one by one until only darkness remained. The counterintelligence operation was a resounding success for Iran. They had not only identified and neutralized a threat, they had turned their adversary's own weapon against them with devastating effect. They had demonstrated a level of sophistication and patience that commanded a new kind of respect in the global intelligence community. The digital masquerade, once a symbol of American ingenuity, was now a monument to its failure, a ghost network haunted by the silence of the assets who had trusted it. The constellation of secrets had gone dark, its stars extinguished one by one. But the knowledge that had brought about this darkness, the secret of the unraveling thread, was an asset too valuable to remain the sole possession of a single nation. An alliance of adversaries, a secret of this magnitude, a vulnerability of this scale, was an asset too valuable to be kept. Having successfully dismantled the American intelligence network within its own borders, the Iranian government recognized that the knowledge it now possessed was a form of strategic capital. It was a weapon, and like any powerful weapon, its true value could be magnified by placing it in the right hands. The victory in their silent war was a significant one, but Iran's leaders understood that they could inflict a far greater and more lasting blow upon their primary adversary by sharing the secret of their success with another, even more powerful, global competitor. And so, a quiet, high-level decision was made to pass the knowledge of the unraveling thread to the People's Republic of China. This was a strategic calculation of immense consequence, an act that would escalate a regional counterintelligence victory into a global intelligence catastrophe. Iran and China were not formal military allies, but they were bound by a shared strategic interest to counterbalance the influence of the United States. Their intelligence services, while rivals who actively spied on one another, understood the concept of a temporary, pragmatic alliance when a common goal presented itself. Sharing this secret was not an act of friendship. It was an act of realpolitik, a calculated move on the grand chessboard. By providing China with the blueprint to dismantle its own American spy networks, Iran could effectively open a second front in this silent conflict, compounding the damage and stretching their adversaries' resources to the breaking point. The transfer of this knowledge would not have been a simple, anonymous data drop. It would have been conducted through the formal, discreet channels of high-level intelligence diplomacy. We can imagine a senior official from Iran's Ministry of Intelligence traveling to Beijing, or perhaps meeting his Chinese counterpart in a secure location in a neutral city like Moscow. The meeting would have been steeped in the quiet, formal protocols of the espionage world. In a room swept for listening devices, over cups of tea, the Iranian official would have laid out the story of their remarkable success. They would have described the years of frustration following the Stuxnet incident, the patient hunt for the mole, and the eventual breakthrough provided by the double agent. The heart of the presentation, however, would have been the technical discovery. The Iranians would have explained, in precise detail, the architectural flaw within the Central Intelligence Agency's covert communication system. They would have provided the digital signature, the unique and repeating fingerprint that connected all the seemingly separate websites. They were not just handing over a list of compromised sites. They were handing over the methodology, the very key that had allowed them to discover those sites in the first place. It was a transfer of weaponized knowledge, a blueprint for replicating their victory. For the Chinese Ministry of State Security, this was a gift of almost unimaginable value. The Chinese intelligence services would have received this information with a professional, quiet intensity. They are a vast, sophisticated, and deeply patient organization, and they would have understood the implications of the Iranian claims immediately, but they would not have accepted them on faith alone. The information would have been passed to their own elite team of technical analysts who would have set about the quiet work of verification. In a secure state laboratory, a facility even more advanced than the one in Tehran, they would have taken the digital signature provided by the Iranians and begun their own open-source intelligence search. The process would have been a mirror image of the discovery that had taken place in Iran months earlier. A Chinese technician, using the unique string of code as a search query, would have patiently sifted through the endless noise of the public internet. And then, the results would have begun to appear. A website, seemingly based in Europe, used for communicating with sources inside China. Another with a different name and theme, but sharing the exact same digital fingerprint. The Iranian claims were being independently and irrefutably verified. The flaw was real, and it was not confined to the Middle East. The very same vulnerability that had crippled the American network in Iran existed within the infrastructure used to support operations against China itself. For the Chinese government, this was a strategic opportunity of historic proportions. For decades, they had been engaged in a relentless, high-stakes battle of wits with American intelligence. The Central Intelligence Agency had a much older, larger, and more deeply embedded network of assets within China than it ever had in Iran. These sources, cultivated over a generation, provided a steady stream of intelligence on everything from Chinese military technology and economic policy to the private lives of its most powerful leaders. This network was a major strategic irritant, a constant threat to the internal stability and secrecy that the Chinese state valued above all else. The prospect of being able to identify and dismantle this network, not just in part, but in its entirety, was a goal they had pursued for years with only partial success. And now, the key to achieving that goal had been delivered to them by an ally of convenience. The quiet sense of elation within the highest echelons of the Ministry of State Security would have been immense. The flaw in the American system was a gift that would allow them to blind their primary global rival. It would enable them to root out the traitors within their own government and military, and to send a chilling message to anyone who might consider collaborating with the West in the future. The partnership between these two rival intelligence services, born of shared opposition, was about to bear devastating fruit. The secret had been passed, a torch handed from one adversary to another in the great global shadow play. The flaw that had brought silence to the ghost network in Iran was now in the hands of a dragon, and its gaze was turning inward, upon the vast and unsuspecting network of spies that had operated within its borders for a generation. The dragon's maw half a world away from the quiet deserts of Iran, in the vibrant, sprawling megacities of modern China, another, much older network of assets suddenly found itself bathed in a harsh and unforgiving light. Within the bustling, crowded streets of Beijing and the gleaming commercial towers of Shanghai, a silent and invisible war was being waged, a conflict whose players had, for a generation, believed they were protected by the shadows of their secret lives. Now, because of a flaw discovered in a distant land, those shadows were about to evaporate. The Chinese Ministry of State Security, having received the weaponized knowledge from their Iranian counterparts, moved with a speed and efficiency that was breathtaking in its scope. Where the Iranians had been methodical and patient, the Chinese were a vast, powerful, and technologically formidable machine. Upon verifying the existence of the architectural flaw, they dedicated immense resources to exploiting it. Their own open-source intelligence teams, even more advanced than those in Tehran, began the methodical work of mapping the American communication network within their own sphere of influence. The process of discovery was rapid and comprehensive. The list of covert websites used for their China operations grew day by day, a quiet cascade of revelations happening inside the secure, silent halls of their intelligence headquarters. The network they were now unmasking was of far greater strategic importance than the one in Iran. This was not a relatively new operation, but a mature and deeply embedded intelligence-gathering structure with roots reaching back decades into the Cold War. The assets were not just low-level functionaries, but in some cases, high-ranking officials within the Communist Party, senior officers in the People's Liberation Army, and scientists working in the country's most sensitive research and development sectors. These were sources cultivated over many years, their relationships with their American handlers built on a deep and abiding foundation of trust. They were the crown jewels of the Central Intelligence Agency's human intelligence operations in Asia, providing a steady and invaluable stream of information on the inner workings of a rising superpower. With the map of the network in their hands, the Chinese began their own long game, mirroring the Iranian strategy but on a much larger and more ruthless scale. For a time, they too chose to simply listen. They monitored the secret communications, they identified the key assets, and they learned the intricate details of American tradecraft. They watched as their own officials, men and women who had sworn an oath of loyalty to their country, passed state secrets to a foreign power. They patiently gathered their evidence, building their cases with a cold and methodical precision. They were allowing the entire network to operate, all the while knowing that they now held the power to destroy it at a moment of their choosing. That moment arrived in the year 2010. And for the next 2 years, through 2012, a silent and systematic purge was conducted across the country. It was a wave of disappearances so quiet and so disconnected that, to the outside world, it was almost imperceptible. A respected professor at a prestigious university in Beijing, a man who occasionally advised the government on foreign policy, might be taken from his home in the middle of the night for questioning, and his colleagues would be told he had been placed under investigation for academic fraud. A promising young officer in the Chinese Navy, stationed at a critical port, would vanish from his post, and his superiors would be informed that he had defected. A scientist working on the country's advanced aerospace program would be abruptly arrested on vague charges of economic corruption. From the perspective of the American handlers, the nightmare that had unfolded in Iran was now repeating itself, but with terrifying speed and finality. The fading signals began once more. First one asset, then another, would miss their scheduled check-in. The digital silence spread like a contagion through their most important global network. The frantic, quiet work of the analysts at Langley confirmed their worst fears. This was not a series of random misfortunes. This was a coordinated, top-down effort to roll up their entire operation. They were witnessing, in real time, one of the most catastrophic intelligence failures in modern American history, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. They could only watch as the lights on their map of China went dark, one by one, until the entire country was a void. The scale of the loss was staggering. It is estimated that dozens of people, American assets who had worked for years in the belief that their communications were secure, were caught in this silent purge. The trust they had placed in the digital masquerade, the faith they had in their American handlers to protect them, had been catastrophically betrayed by a single, repeating flaw in a line of code. The human cost was immeasurable. Lives that had been lived in a delicate balance between public duty and secret conviction were brought to a sudden, brutal, and often final conclusion. The strategic consequences were equally profound. An entire generation of human intelligence work inside China was erased. The United States lost its on-the-ground visibility into the plans and intentions of its most significant economic and military competitor at a critical juncture in the 21st century. A network that had taken decades of patient, dangerous work to build was gone. Rebuilding such a network, in the wake of such a visible and terrifying purge, would be the work of another generation, if it could be done at all. The balance of power in the quiet, global war of secrets had been fundamentally and decisively shifted. The network was gone, a testament to a generational failure of intelligence. The strategic loss was immeasurable, a void in the West's understanding of a rising superpower. But behind the strategic calculus lay a more profound and disturbing truth, the quiet, brutal reality of what happened to the dozens of men and women who were caught in the dragon's maw. The brutal reality, the consequences of the great unraveling were not abstract. They were not sterile statistics on a page or pins removed from a map in a distant headquarters. For the dozens of individuals caught in the dragnet in Iran and China, the consequences were visceral, immediate, and final. In a state laboratory, somewhere in the vast industrial heartland of China, a group of scientists and engineers were called away from their work one afternoon and gathered in a plain, windowless conference room. There was a quiet confusion as they took their seats. The doors were closed. And then, a large television screen at the front of the room flickered to life, and they were made to watch a silent, closed-circuit feed of the execution of their colleague, and beside him, his pregnant wife. This was the brutal reality that lay at the end of the unraveling thread. The strategic loss for American intelligence was a subject of quiet, academic debate in secure rooms in Washington. But on the ground in China, the response from the Ministry of State Security was a lesson in cold, calculated terror. The rolling up of the network was not just an act of counter-espionage. It was a campaign of psychological warfare, designed not only to eliminate the current threat, but to poison the very ground from which any future threat might grow. The message was being sent not just to the spies themselves, but to the entire class of educated professionals, the scientists, the officials, the academics from which they were recruited. And the message was simple: this is the price of betrayal. The anecdotes that have slowly leaked out from former intelligence officials over the years paint a chilling picture of this period. In one account, a high-ranking Chinese official who had been providing information to the Central Intelligence Agency, was identified and arrested. But his end was not a quiet trial or a secret execution. Instead, he was taken to the central courtyard of the government building where he had worked alongside his colleagues for years. His former co-workers were ordered to assemble at their windows and watch. There, in the open air, in the middle of a workday, he was shot. It was a piece of public theater, a stark and brutal performance designed to instill a fear so deep that it would be passed down in whispers for a generation. It was an act of profound and symbolic retribution. But it was the other stories, the ones that happened in more private, controlled settings, that reveal an even deeper level of calculated cruelty. The execution of the scientist and his pregnant wife, forced upon their colleagues, was not about punishment. It was about trauma. It was an act designed to create a permanent, indelible scar on the minds of all who witnessed it. It was a way for the state to say that collaboration with the enemy would not only result in your own death, but in the destruction of your entire legacy, your family, your very name. By forcing the man's peers to watch, the state was making them complicit in the act, turning them from passive observers into unwilling participants in a ceremony of state-sanctioned terror. The silence in that room, as the screen went dark, would have been a more powerful deterrent than any public proclamation. This campaign of internal terror was China's chosen method. It was a quiet, methodical, and ruthlessly efficient purge, with the stories of its brutality intended to circulate internally as cautionary tales. The Iranian approach, while no less final for the victims, had a different psychological objective. While China's terror was largely for domestic consumption, Iran engaged in a campaign of public triumphalism. Their state-controlled media produced documentaries and issued bold press releases, boasting of their successes in defeating the American spy rings. They celebrated their counterintelligence services as heroic defenders of the nation, showcasing their ability to outwit the so-called Great Satan. This was psychological warfare for an external audience, a message to the world and to their own people of their strength and resilience. Two different authoritarian states, using the same intelligence victory, had chosen two different paths to capitalize on it, one of silent, internal terror, the other of loud, external propaganda. For the Western world, and particularly for the American press, the true nature of these events remained shrouded in an almost impenetrable fog. These were not American citizens being killed, and the events were taking place in some of the most closed and information-controlled societies on Earth. The stories that did emerge were fragmented, often unverified anecdotes passed along by sources in the intelligence community. A reporter might hear a whisper of a man being shot in a courtyard, but there would be no official record, no family members willing to speak, no way to confirm the story through conventional journalistic means. The governments of Iran and China held a complete monopoly on the information surrounding these purges. They could erase a person from existence, and the outside world would be none the wiser. The silence from the American government itself only added to this obscurity. There was no official acknowledgement, no public condemnation, no demand for justice for the foreign assets who had been lost. The brutal reality was a story that could not be fully told. its chapters written in blood in secret prisons and government courtyards, its pages immediately classified and buried. The dozens of men and women who were lost were, in the end, twice erased, once by the states that executed them, and again by the necessary silence of the agency they had tried to serve. These stories, fragmented and whispered, were the brutal reality behind the fading signals. They were the final, unreported moments of the men and women who were caught in the unraveling. And their violent, hidden ends would find their only official acknowledgement in the form of silent, unnamed stars carved into a wall of cold, white marble thousands of miles away. The Wall of Stars. In the quiet, marble-lined lobby of the original headquarters building of the Central Intelligence Agency in Langley, Virginia, there is a monument of stark and solemn power. It is a large wall of white Vermont marble, and carved into its surface are 140 stars. Each star represents a member of the agency who has fallen in the line of duty. Below the stars, a simple inscription reads, "In honor of those members of the Central Intelligence Agency who gave their lives in the service of their country, this is the memorial wall, the most sacred space within the agency, a silent and permanent acknowledgement of the ultimate sacrifice. This wall is the only place where the brutal reality of the events in Iran and China would find any form of official, institutional acknowledgement." In the wake of the catastrophic collapse of two of its most critical intelligence networks and the loss of dozens of human assets, the public response from the United States government was a profound and deliberate silence. There were no presidential statements of condemnation, no press conferences detailing the disaster, no indictments filed against the foreign officials who had ordered the executions. The story, one of the most significant intelligence failures of the 21st century, was simply not told. This silence was not an oversight, nor was it a simple attempt to avoid embarrassment. It was a strategic necessity, a final, cold act of tradecraft, in a game where even the acknowledgement of a loss can be a form of defeat. To have publicly confirmed the disaster would have been to hand a massive propaganda victory to Iran and China. It would have been an official validation of their counterintelligence successes. More importantly, it would have been a confirmation that the dozens of individuals they had imprisoned and executed were, in fact, working for the United States. Such an admission would have posthumously justified the actions of those regimes in the eyes of international law, and it would have put any other potential assets, anywhere in the world, in even greater danger. In the paradoxical logic of the espionage world, the only way to honor the sacrifice of the fallen assets and to protect those who remained was to pretend they had never existed at all. The silence was a shield, and so the story was buried. But behind the high walls of the intelligence community, a frantic and deeply classified investigation began. The agency had to understand what had happened. They needed to know how a system believed to be nearly flawless had failed so completely. In the initial phases of this internal damage assessment, one theory that gained traction was that of a human betrayal from within their own ranks. The search for a mole began, a hunt for a modern-day Aldrich Ames who might have sold the secrets of the network to the Chinese. This search eventually focused on a former agency officer named Jerry Chun-Shing Lee. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation searched Lee's belongings, they discovered notebooks containing the classified names and contact information of Central Intelligence Agency informants in China. The discovery was a significant one, and Lee was eventually charged and convicted for the unlawful retention of classified information. For a time, the mole theory seemed to be the most plausible explanation for the disaster. It was a familiar and somehow more palatable narrative. A single, treacherous individual is a problem that can be understood and contained. It is often easier for a large institution to accept the idea of a single human failure than it is to confront the possibility of a systemic, technological one. But as the full scope of the collapse became clear, the mole theory alone could not account for the sheer speed and scale of the compromise. Lee's notebooks contained some of the names of the lost informants, but not all of them. And his betrayal could not explain the parallel disaster that had unfolded in Iran, a theater where he had not been involved. The evidence did not point to a single leak, but to a universal, catastrophic flood. The common denominator was not a person, it was the technology. The root cause was the elegant, flawed system of the digital masquerade. The only public echo of this entire devastating affair came years later, in the quiet academic setting of a Washington, D.C. think tank. Mike Rogers, a former congressman who had served as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee during the period of the collapse, was speaking on a panel at the Center for a New American Security. In his remarks, he made a brief and carefully worded reference to a past crisis. He spoke of investigations his committee had conducted into how the agency's sources and agents communicate with each other. He then said, and his words are a masterclass in official understatement, "If you recall, we had some blips." He went on to say that his committee had worked to fix this problem, which he acknowledged was a serious problem, a blip. This single, soft, and almost dismissive word was the only official, public description ever offered for a disaster that had cost dozens of lives and erased a generation of intelligence work. It was a quiet ripple on the surface, offering no hint of the immense and violent wreckage that lay in the depths below. For the Iranian and Chinese citizens who had risked their lives to provide information, there would be no star on the wall in Langley. That honor is reserved for the agency's own officers. There would be no public memorial, no acknowledgement of their service. Their sacrifice would be recorded only in the agency's most deeply classified files, their stories known only to the handlers who had worked with them and the analysts who had read their reports. They were the unsung, unnamed casualties in a silent war, and the official silence surrounding their fate was absolute. The silence was a strategic necessity, a final, cold act of tradecraft to protect what little remained. But while the story of the lost networks was buried, the root cause of the failure, the elegant, flawed system, and the unheeded warning of the man who saw its dangers remained an unresolved echo within the machine. Echoes in the system. And so, we end where we began, with a flaw in a system, and with the quiet, unheeded warning of the man who first discovered it. The great, cascading disaster that rippled from Iran to China, leaving a trail of collapsed networks and lost lives, was not an unforeseen act of nature. It was a failure that had been predicted, documented, and reported through the proper channels. The story's final, somber chapter is not about the spies or the spy masters, but about the lingering echoes of this failure and the fate of the messenger who tried to prevent it. John Reedy, the contractor who had identified the architectural flaw in the digital masquerade, the man who had warned of a coming nightmare scenario, saw his own life descend into a quiet and personal ordeal. For his efforts to raise the alarm, for his professional diligence in reporting a critical vulnerability, he was not rewarded. He was dismissed. The official reason given was the competing business he maintained on the side, a convenient justification that allowed the institution to focus on the imperfections of the messenger rather than the disturbing content of his message. With the termination of his contract came the revocation of his security clearance, a decision that effectively ended his career in the specialized world of the intelligence community. The professional life he had built was dismantled. The personal cost was equally severe. The strain of the ordeal took its toll on his family, and the life he had known before he sounded his lonely alarm fell apart. His story is a familiar and tragic one in the annals of large, secretive institutions, that of a man who speaks a difficult truth to power, and who is, in turn, broken by it. One might assume that in the wake of such a catastrophic and undeniable failure, the first and most urgent priority of the Central Intelligence Agency would have been to tear down the flawed communication system, to erase it completely and replace it with something new and fundamentally secure. But the reality of vast, complex bureaucracies is rarely so simple or so swift. According to follow-up reporting, as late as 5 years after the networks in Iran and China had been annihilated, the core issues with the underlying technology continued to plague the agency. The ghost of the flawed system had not been fully exorcised. The reasons for this lingering vulnerability were rooted in the very nature of the institution itself. The agency, like any large governmental body, is comprised of different departments or directorates, each with its own culture, its own priorities, and its own budget. The Directorate of Science and Technology, the branch responsible for creating advanced tools like the communication platform, often has a different perspective from the Directorate of Operations, the branch of field agents and handlers who must use those tools in dangerous and unpredictable environments. These internal disagreements over how to handle the technology where it could be safely deployed, how it should be fixed, and who was responsible for the failure led to a state of bureaucratic gridlock. The problem was so deeply embedded, so woven into the fabric of their global operations, that there was no easy or unanimous consensus on how to move forward. Furthermore, the system itself was described as a complex web of interlocking technical systems. It was not a single standalone program that could be easily uninstalled and replaced. It was a foundational layer of their covert infrastructure, connected in countless ways to other platforms and databases. To rip it out completely would be akin to discovering a flaw in the steel composition used to build the frame of a skyscraper after the building is already 50 stories tall. The problem is not just the steel itself, but everything that has been built upon it. Fixing the root cause would be a monumental and potentially destabilizing undertaking. And so, Patches are applied, workarounds are developed, and policies are written, but the fundamental, underlying vulnerability can remain, an echo in the system. And so the story of the great unraveling concludes not with a neat and tidy resolution, but with the quiet, contemplative reality of an imperfect world. It is a story about the profound fragility of trust in a digital age, a reminder that even the most sophisticated systems, built by the most powerful organizations, can be brought down by a single human oversight. It is a story about the complex and often contradictory nature of large institutions, where the instinct for self-preservation can sometimes overwhelm the duty to confront a difficult truth. It is a story of strategic alliances, of hidden conflicts, and of the silent, brutal arithmetic of the espionage world, where the lives of assets are weighed against the strategic interests of nations. But most of all, it is a story of echoes. The echo of John Reedy's unheeded warning, a testament to the courage and the cost of speaking truth. The echo of the fading signals from Iran and China, a digital silence that speaks to the final, lonely moments of dozens of lost assets. And the echo of former Chairman Mike Rogers' voice, reducing a generational catastrophe to a single soft word, a blip. In the silent world of secrets, nothing ever truly disappears. A failed system, a lost network, an unheeded warning, they all leave their mark, not as loud alarms, but as quiet, persistent echoes in the machine, a low and constant hum beneath the noise of the world, a reminder of the profound and enduring cost of a single, simple mistake. As our story comes to a close, let the details fade into the background, like the soft focus of a lens turning toward a distant horizon. The names, the dates, the specific locations, let them dissolve, leaving behind only the quiet, resonant echoes of the themes we have explored together. Let us drift for a while in this space of reflection, allowing the rhythm of the narrative to slow, to soften, and to guide us toward a place of deep and peaceful rest. The journey through the world of shadows is complete, and now is a time for stillness, a time to contemplate the quiet truths that lie beneath the surface of the story we have heard. Let us first consider the nature of silence. Our story began not with a sound, but with a silence. Imagine, if you can, the vast and arid expanse of the Iranian salt desert, the ancient mountains standing as silent witnesses under a dome of brilliant, empty blue. And deep beneath that silent landscape, in the cool, controlled air of a subterranean city, there was once a sound. It was the sound of human ambition given mechanical voice, the sound of thousands of machines spinning in perfect, intricate harmony. It was a constant, predictable hum, a sound of progress, of power, of a nation's determined will. It was a sound that filled the space, a testament to the technology it represented. And then, a new kind of silence fell. It was not the peaceful silence of the desert outside, but a silence that was a presence in itself. It was the silence of failure, the sound of 1,000 harmonious voices suddenly stilled. This was a silence full of questions, a silence that spoke of a deep and invisible wound. It was an unquiet silence, a void where there was once a perfect, rhythmic hum, and it was in this first, jarring silence that our story was born. From this silence in the desert, other silences grew, echoing outward in concentric circles. There was the silence of the fading signals, a silence of a different and more personal kind. Imagine a handler, thousands of miles away, in a quiet, secure room, the only light coming from the soft glow of a monitor. He is watching a channel, a digital stream that is supposed to carry a message, a sign of life from a person who exists only as a code name, but who is also a human being with a family, a life, a story. The handler waits. The scheduled time for the message arrives, and it passes. The screen remains unchanged. This is the digital silence, a quiet, electronic void that can contain a universe of terrifying possibilities. It is the silence of a question asked into the darkness, met with no reply. It is the silence of a connection that has been severed, a thread that has been cut. And as this silence repeated itself, asset by asset, the quiet dread grew. It was the sound of a network, a living thing made of human trust and digital code, slowly and systematically dying. It was a silence that was not empty, but was instead filled with a dawning, helpless understanding of a catastrophe unfolding in slow motion, a world away. And this digital silence, this chorus of unanswered calls, was met with another, even larger silence. This was the silence of institutions, the great official silence of a government that could not speak of its losses. Imagine the contrast, the brutal, violent reality of the events on the ground and the profound, deliberate quiet of the official response. This was a silence born of a cold, strategic necessity. It was a silence that acted as a shield, a final, somber act of tradecraft to protect what little remained. It was a silence that required the burying of a story, the leaving of questions unanswered, the turning away from public acknowledgement. This institutional silence was a heavy, weighted thing, a quiet testament to the paradox of a world where revealing a failure can be more dangerous than the failure itself. It was a silence that absorbed the shock, contained the damage, and allowed the great, vast machinery of the state to continue turning, even as some of its most vital gears had been broken and lost. It was a silence that spoke volumes, its quietness a measure of the depth of the disaster it was designed to conceal. Finally, all of these transient silences, the mechanical, the digital, the institutional, find their final, permanent expression in one last, hallowed quiet. Let your mind drift to the cool marble lobby of a government building in Virginia. Let it rest on a single, vast wall of polished white stone. This is the silence of the memorial wall, a silence of reverence, of memory, and of profound, unspoken sorrow. Here, the noise of the world fades away, replaced by a quiet that is almost absolute. It is the silence of history, of sacrifices made in secret, of stories that can never be fully told. The stars carved into the marble are silent witnesses. Many of them are unnamed, their stories locked away in the deepest vaults of national security. They represent the final silence, the end of a journey for the men and women of the agency. And for the foreign assets, the dozens who were lost in Iran and China, there is no star. Theirs is an even deeper silence, an anonymity in death that mirrors the anonymity of their service. Their only memorial is in the classified files and the quiet, personal memories of the handlers who knew them. The silence of this wall is the final word in our story, a quiet, permanent echo of the human cost that underpins the entire invisible world of secrets. Now, let us turn our thoughts to the unseen. So much of our story took place in the realm of the invisible. The conflict was not one of armies clashing on a battlefield, but of unseen forces moving through unseen channels. It began with an unseen weapon, a digital ghost. The Stuxnet worm was a marvel of invisibility, a piece of code that moved through systems without a trace, its presence unknown until its work was done. It was a phantom that haunted the machines at Natanz, an unseen intelligence that could manipulate the physical world while remaining a string of ones and zeros on a computer drive. This idea of an unseen, intelligent force set the stage for all that was to come. It introduced a new kind of fear, the fear of an enemy you cannot see, a threat that operates on a plane of existence just beyond your normal perception. This unseen threat gave rise to the Ghost Network itself, an entire infrastructure designed to be invisible. The agents and assets moved through the world under a cloak of normalcy, their true purpose hidden behind the facade of their ordinary lives. The communication system they used was a testament to this philosophy of the unseen. It was a digital masquerade, a network of secret doors hidden in the walls of the most common and public of places. The secret messages were not merely encrypted, they were invisible, their presence masked by the endless, meaningless chatter of the public internet. To be unseen was to be safe. To blend in, to become part of the background noise, was the highest form of tradecraft. The entire system was an exercise in creating and maintaining invisibility, a quiet acknowledgement that in this particular game, the player who is seen is the player who loses. And yet, this world of the unseen was ultimately penetrated by an act of unseen observation. The Iranian counterintelligence teams, once they had the key, became an unseen presence themselves. They were the silent watchers, the invisible audience in the secret theater of the Ghost Network. They were ghosts hunting other ghosts. Their surveillance was a quiet, patient act of watching from the shadows, of becoming an unseen presence within their adversaries' most secret spaces. The American handlers and their assets continued to communicate, believing their conversations were private, entirely unaware that a silent, unseen third party was recording their every word. This is perhaps the most unsettling form of the unseen. The feeling of being watched by an invisible observer, the knowledge that your most private sanctuary has been quietly and completely compromised. The power in this world belonged to the one who could see without being seen. The flaw itself, the root cause of the entire disaster, was also a thing unseen. It was not a gaping hole in the security, but a subtle, almost invisible architectural detail, a hairline crack in the foundation. It was a flaw that was unseen by its creators, by its users, and by the very institution that deployed it. But it was not unseen by everyone. A single, observant eye, the eye of the contractor John Reedy, was able to perceive this invisible vulnerability. he saw the unseen thread that connected all the disparate parts. His tragedy was that he could not make others see what he saw. His warning was of an unseen danger, an abstract threat that had not yet manifested, and so it was dismissed. The story is a quiet meditation on the difficulty of seeing the invisible, of recognizing the subtle, hidden patterns that can lead to catastrophic failure. It reminds us that the most dangerous threats are often not the ones we can see coming, but the ones that are hidden in plain sight, the unseen flaws in the systems we trust the most. Let us now reflect on the metaphor of the thread, the single, unraveling thread that runs through our entire narrative. A story, after all, is a thread, a line of narrative that we follow from beginning to end. And this story was about how a single, fine thread, when pulled, can cause an entire, vast tapestry to come undone. The thread first appeared as a line of code, the unique, repeating digital signature that connected all the covert websites. It was a single, common element, a tiny thread of shared design in what was supposed to be a patchwork of separate, isolated pieces. It was a thread of convenience, perhaps, left by the developers, a small shortcut that would have immense and unforeseen consequences. When the Iranian intelligence services discovered this thread, the act of pulling on it was an act of simple, elegant deduction. They followed this single, fine line, and it led them from one secret to the next, revealing the entire, hidden pattern of the network. The whole complex structure was brought down not by a massive force, but by the patient, persistent pulling of this one vulnerable thread. It is a quiet reminder of the interconnectedness of things, of how even the largest and most powerful systems can be undone by their smallest, most overlooked component. A single thread of code, a single point of failure, was enough to compromise a global infrastructure. But the thread is also a human one. The unraveling began with a single human thread, the double agent. This one individual, a single point of betrayal, was the one who first handed the end of the thread to the Iranians. And the story is woven from other human threads as well. The thread of trust between a handler and an asset, a fragile connection that must be maintained across vast distances and profound danger. When the network collapsed, it was these human threads that were broken, these lines of communication and trust that were severed, with final and tragic consequences. And there is the thread of John Reedy's warning, a thread of truth that was offered but not taken up, a line that, if followed, might have led to safety, but was instead left to lie fallow. Our story shows us that history itself is a thread, and that single small events, single choices made by single individuals in quiet rooms, can pull on the fabric of the world in ways that are impossible to predict, causing everything to unravel. Let us consider the idea of walls. Our story is a story of walls, both real and imagined. It took place behind the high, fortified walls of the Natanz facility, a place designed to keep the world out, a physical barrier to protect a nation's most sensitive secrets. But the story showed us that even the strongest physical walls can be breached by something small and intangible, a line of code carried through the gate on a simple flash drive. The highest walls, the deepest bunkers, are no defense against a threat that can be carried in a pocket. Then there were the digital walls of the communication system. Each covert website was designed to be a walled garden, a secure, self-contained sanctuary where secrets could be shared. These walls were built of encryption and clever code designed to be invisible to the outside world. The users inside these digital walls felt a sense of security, a belief in the strength of their defenses. But the architectural flaw was a secret door that connected all of these walled gardens, a single key that could unlock them all. The story teaches us that in a connected world, no wall is truly absolute. A flaw in one can become a flaw in all. The belief in the security of these digital walls was an illusion, and when it shattered, the consequences were devastating. There were also the walls of bureaucracy, the institutional walls within the Central Intelligence Agency itself. These are the unseen walls that separate departments, that slow the flow of information, that create a culture of need to know. It was against one of these walls that John Reedy's warning came to a halt. His message, clear and urgent, could not penetrate the walls of institutional inertia and bureaucratic self-preservation. These walls, designed to create order and security within an organization, can also become a prison for vital information, preventing a critical warning from reaching those with the power to act. The disaster that unfolded was, in part, a failure of communication across these internal, invisible walls. And finally, we return to the last wall, the cold, white marble of the memorial wall. This is a wall that does not seek to keep people out, but to draw them into a space of quiet contemplation. It is a wall that separates the past from the present, the dead from the living. It is a wall that holds secrets, its unnamed stars representing stories that cannot be told. Unlike the other walls in our story, this one is not a defense or a barrier to truth. It is a testament to it. It is a quiet, permanent acknowledgement of the risks and the costs of a life lived in the shadows. It is the final wall, the one that stands at the very end of the story, a silent tribute to those who operated behind all the other walls, and who ultimately fell when those walls were breached. Let us reflect, finally, on the human heart of this story. Beyond the technology, the geopolitics, and the grand strategies, this was a story about people. It was a story about trust, the most essential and yet most fragile currency in the world of espionage. The entire Ghost network was built on trust. The trust an asset placed in their handler to protect them. The trust a handler placed in the agency's technology to secure their communications. The trust the agency placed in its personnel to remain loyal. And it was the violation of these trusts, at every level, that led to the collapse. A double agent betrayed the trust of his handlers. A flawed technology betrayed the trust of its users. An institution, by ignoring a warning, betrayed the trust of a diligent contractor. It was also a story about loyalty and betrayal, two sides of the same coin. The double agent's betrayal of the Central Intelligence Agency was, in his own mind, an act of profound loyalty to his home country. The assets who provided information to the West saw their actions not as betrayal, but as loyalty to a different idea, a different vision for their country's future. The story exists in this gray space, this wilderness of mirrors where the motivations of individuals are complex and often contradictory. There are no simple heroes or villains, only people making difficult, dangerous choices, their lives defined by the secrets they choose to keep and the loyalties they choose to serve. And ultimately, it is a story about the quiet, human realities of a life lived in secret. The fear that an asset must feel every day, the constant pressure of living a double life, the immense responsibility that a handler must carry, knowing that a single mistake could cost another person their life. The intellectual focus of the analyst, trying to find meaning in the fragments of secrets gathered at such a great price. And the quiet, lonely courage of the whistleblower, who sees a flaw and chooses to speak, knowing the potential cost to himself. These are the human currents that flow beneath the surface of our story, the quiet, emotional truths that give the grand, strategic narrative its weight and its meaning. It is these human echoes that will stay with us the longest, long after the details of the technology have faded from memory. And now, as we leave this world of shadows behind, let the echoes begin to soften. Let the story dissolve, its themes and images gently fading like the last light of dusk. The unquiet desert grows still once more, its silence now truly peaceful. The listening posts have fallen silent, their screens gone dark. The unraveling thread has been woven back into the great tapestry of the past. The walls, both real and imagined, recede into the distance. All that remains is a deep and profound quiet, a stillness that invites you to let go. Let your mind drift on this quiet, following the fading signals not to a place of danger, but to a place of serene and effortless rest. The story is over. The echoes are fading, and all that is left is the gentle, rhythmic breath of the coming night and the deep, restorative peace of sleep. The silence that remains is yours to enjoy, a soft and welcoming space for your mind to rest. If these stories and the quiet space they create have been a welcome companion for you on your journey to rest, we hope you will consider becoming a more permanent part of our community. By subscribing, you allow these stories to continue to be told, and you ensure that you will always have a quiet place to return to at the end of a long day. And if you know someone else who might find solace in our narratives, someone who is also seeking a peaceful refuge from the noise of the world, we would be grateful if you would share this channel with them. Thank you for listening, and may your rest be deep and your dreams be peaceful.